Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem, Yet, Ye Downcast Hours. This is poem number 5 of the 18 of Whispers of Heavenly Death Cloister. I find this poem, the one preceding it that we've already spoken of Him I Love, and the one to follow, Phantom, as being an amazing 3 poems to read together, especially in light of our study of Homer's Iliad. You'll remember in the Iliad passages, books 18, 19, 21, 22, 23, that Achilles is going through his grieving process, having lost his best pal, his lover, Patroclus. And then finally, Patroclus actually has to speak to Achilles and say, dude, come on, I need you to take care of my burial rites so that I can get on with whatever happens next down in Hades. We've given full lectures on that and exegesis of that at learnstrong.net in our study of the Iliad. But I find it fascinating the way that all those echoes are playing out in a poem like this. We'll get to it in a little bit. Now, our assumptions are that you've been with us at learnstrong.net. Down the left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist. And that you were there from the very first invitation, where come all the way up to and including all of the great poems, including the cluster of drum taps, where, of course, death was ever present there. But we've given a set of introductory comments to introductory comments to Whispers of Heavenly Death. I hope you're familiar with those. And then we just finished with Of Him I Love. Now, as is always the case, we turn in our Nortons to hear about this poem. The second and third stanzas of this poem first appeared in Leaves of Grass 1860 as sections 5 and 6 of Debris. They reappeared in Leaves of Grass 1867 as the poem Despairing Cries, and I think that's a key title, even though it's a different title now. And in 1871, the first stanza and present title were added when the poem appeared among the Whispers of Heavenly Death in Passage to India, 1871. In his revised Leaves of Grass blue copy, as it's often referred to, Whitman noted marginally, quote, transfer to religious leaves, end quote. No doubt, Whitman, as one of those P's that would be priest if we had added a 6 to the 5 that we're messing with, for sure, this poem will count towards Whitman as priest. That is to say, dealing with loss. Again, the idea of downcast. Again, the arcane language of ye. We messed around with this in so many earlier poems. The way he'll sometimes drop into that Quaker language as Hicks and others were so influential in his life. I love the use of yet. For the Gladiator fans in the house, of course, it's the last word of that great film, that classic film. The word yet is in not yet. Yet, in other words, ongoing. And to me, this is just pure Emily Dickinson. Her repetition of certain words as well. Notice the word downcast in the opening line, and obviously the title here will take us back to Crossing Brooklyn Ferry 9, Downcast Eyes. Yet, ye downcast hours, I know ye also. Weights of lead, how ye clog and cling at my ankles. Earth to a chamber of mourning turns. I hear the overweening mocking voice. Matter is conqueror, matter triumphant only, continues onward. Despairing cries float ceaselessly toward me. Call of my nearest lover, putting forth, alarmed, uncertain. The sea, I am quickly to sail. Come, tell me where I am speeding. Tell me my destination. I understand your anguish, but I cannot help you. I approach, hear, behold, the sad mouth, the look out of the eyes, your mute inquiry. Whither I go, from the bed I recline on, come, tell me. Old age, alarmed, uncertain, a young woman's voice appealing to me for comfort, a young man's voice. Shall I not escape? It is a compelling poem. Some have seen this the most humane poem in all of Leaves of Grass. Certainly the argument could be made that the pathos of this poem is just palpable. It's compelling. And of course, all humans, this is the theodicy question of our Big Five, have to deal with loss. And what's the worst imaginable loss? It may not be our own death. It may be the death of those we care most for. And notice here it's yet, and then it's downcast hours. Notice it's not minutes, it's hours, right? I know ye also. In other words, yeah, I've had happy moments in my life. Yes. But part of swinging at the park is watching others have to leave the park and no longer get to swing. And for Whitman, from this moment in Whispers of Heavenly Death on in Leaves of Grass, that's the compelling challenge for him. He uses the word weights, which will take us back to Shelley's Ode to the West Wind 4, when he talks about that heavy, weary weight of life, that unintelligible, and all of that, from Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey as well. How ye clog and cling at my ankles. This idea of being trapped in the ankle, this will be, of course, Yeats is sailing to Byzantium. O sages standing in God's holy fires in a gold mosaic of the wall, come from the holy flower, burn in a gyre, be the singing masters of my soul, consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fasten to a dying animal that knows not what it is, and gather me to the artifice of eternity. This idea that there's this attachment to a corpse that's at our ankles, and you can't get away from it. Obviously, references to the great, to the great Roman legions that would at times punish the defeated this way. Earth to a chamber of mourning turns. You'll remember this word mourning in Old Ireland. I hear the o'erweening mocking voice. Notice we'll kind of play around with this idea of mocking in the next poem as well with phantom. And then 5 times in this poem we have italicized, which is of course the words of the lover who is about to leave. And or death. Matter is conqueror. Matter, triumphant only, continues onward. In other words, all there is matter. And yet somehow we have this sense there must be something else going on in death, taking us obviously back to Plato's Phaedo as we've talked about it at Ernström. Despairing cries float ceaselessly toward me. You'll remember fast anchored eternal love, I float in the regions of your love. Only notice now here the word float. And it takes us obviously back to crossing Brooklyn Ferry. And we mentioned 9, but the entire poem I think is echoed here. Despairing cries float ceaselessly toward me. We think of our Dante, no doubt, here as well. The call of my nearest lover putting forth, alarmed. We're going to get to this alarmed again at the very end of the poem. Uncertain. Think about the power of this poem as it relates to Whitman watching again and again and again young men dying while he was nursing them during the 4 years of the Civil War. It forever affected him, as we commented in our study of drum taps. And here, notice, it's very possible that some young man, a would-be lover possibly even, would speak the next italicized words, using the imagery of Odysseus, using the imagery of sailing. The sea, I am quickly to sail. Come, tell me. Now this tell me phrase is only used 1 time in all Leaves of Grass. It's in this poem. I find that compelling. Tell me. In other words, the use of the word come. I told you it's the first word. I told you guys, when we started reading Leaves of Grass together, the very first word of the Deathbed Edition is, and notice that, it is the word come. It is an invitation word. And notice it's called the Deathbed Edition. There's a lot of debate about why it's called the Deathbed Edition. Scholars have tried to, piece it all together. Of course, that collection of the last poems, like we've always been reading. And Whitman constantly editing. But here it's, notice, the sea I'm quickly to sail. Passage to India comes to mind, right? Come, tell me, come, they're repeating. Come, tell me where I am speeding. Tell me my destination. Well, this is the question, as we learned in our study of Plato's Phaedo. What happens when the hemlock is drunk by Socrates? And he muses on it, right? As we talked about. Well, if there's this thing called the body, there's probably this thing called the soul. Because you got to have a mind to argue there is no mind. You got to have a soul to argue there is no soul. And in that regard, Socrates says, I wonder where I'm going. On my next adventure? Notice, come tell me where I'm speeding. Tell me my destination. Back to Whitman. I understand your anguish, and that's what it is. This is brilliant. I understand your anguish could be the speaker who's just addressed him, or it could be you and me reading this. But I cannot help you. Do you remember this from Song of Myself 46? You're asking me questions, I answer, I cannot answer. You must find out for yourself. Remember. I approach, hear, behold the sad mouth, the look out of the eyes. We're not sure if we're talking about Whitman or we're talking about the one he's looking at. Your mute inquiry. It's an interesting mute inquiry. And then the next one. Whither I go from the bed I recline on, come, tell me. In other words, give me some answers. And again, I told you guys, one way to read Leaves of Grass is as a theodicy. Why does this moment have to come? Why can't we just swing at the park forever and just have fun? Like, why? Here it is. There's certain kinds of questions that are beyond language, translinguistic. And then notice, whether I go from the bed I recline on, come, tell me. And then back to Whitman, old age, alarmed, uncertain, and then from old age to, notice the dash, a young woman's voice appealing to me for comfort, a young man's voice. And then one last question. Shall I not escape? That is to say, the inevitability of death. And the ways in which that inevitability somehow qualifies all of life as so unbelievably precious. Not only our own life, but of course the lives of all those we love. What are we going to make of a poem like this at 2A, Messages Theme? So I think there's always questions surrounding death, no matter what. And all of the great texts seem to somehow point to that fact. In other words, you're never alone. As John Donne will say, I mentioned him in an earlier lecture in Meditation 17, no one is an island entire. We're all a part of the main. Don't ask for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for each one of us. Right? At 2B, I love the power of the italicized. We've seen this in other poems in Leaves of Grass. Obviously, 5 times we'll play that game. Right? It interrupts, and yet it brilliantly interrupts the poem. At 3A, I think of Tennyson's Ulysses here, the 1842 offering. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. I think the questions that are so foundational take us as well back to Iliad 1823. I think the pathos of Achilles trying to come to terms. And of course, he had committed lots of men to death, and yet in this moment, death becomes so palpable and real for him, losing Patroclus, right? Finally, at 3B, I mean, to really own poems like this, you've got to crawl inside of poems like this. You've got to ask questions like, what are your questions about death and about dying and about losing those that you care about? And to what degree is your study of Leaves of Grass helping you to come to some answers about those questions? I hope that our reading here is helping you. Thank you.